For this week and next week, I will be teaching classes that are repeats from previous years. That's because I feel like these two lessons, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 through 4, are foundational material that if you don't get those, you'll miss what I'm referring back to in later lessons. So if you missed last week, you can go to the Stake website and watch week 1. That's the week 1 from 4 years ago, but it's still week 1. But starting after that, after next week, I will not be teaching the same classes that we had the last time we did Old Testament. I'm going to intersperse new lessons, which means if you weren't here for 2022, you'll want to go to the Stake website and watch the lessons I'm skipping because they're there. And so our goal at the end of the year was that we'll have something like 48 lessons instead of 24. So that's our goal. Last week we talked about the names of God, the organization of the Old Testament, the handout, and any questions you might have on that handout. Today we're going to do Genesis chapter 1 in some detail. And sometimes I'll ask questions that may seem perfectly obvious, but they're not obvious to everybody. So, if you know an answer, give an answer, right? What we're going to do today is a chart that is typical of what I have found in Jewish study Bibles. Now, you know how the church has recommended that we pick some more recent translations to assist us in understanding the biblical text. My favorite at the moment is the RSV, which is the Revised Standard, or you can do the NRSV, which is the New Revised Standard. It probably has 10 words different from the old one, but that's good. One that many people have used is the New International. But you, in addition to getting a different translation, you might want to get yourself a study Bible. And what a study Bible has is commentary at the bottom of the page to give you information that biblical scholars and historians and sociologists, etc., have used as background for interpreting the text. So I have an NIV cultural background study Bible, and that's what I'm reading this year. My daughter has one that's an RSV cultural background, and there's all kinds of different study Bibles that you can get. You can get one that's a devotional study Bible that talks about how do you apply this in your life. There are some made for women's study groups. Just maybe go to a, I don't even know if there are any around anymore. There used to be bookstores that had a section of religious books, and you could go and look through and see which study Bible you liked best. If anybody wants to come and look at mine, you are welcome to do that. BYU has a good collection, and you can go to the BYU main library and go downstairs to the religion department, which is adjacent to the family history library in the BYU library. And they have quite a nice collection of study Bibles, and so you can look at them and see what you might want. I have a Jewish study Bible. Now, when you translate the Hebrew into English, whether you're Jewish or Christian, it's still going to be the same words, right? So a Jewish study Bible is not imposing different translations so much as adding commentary at the bottom of the page from the rabbis, and I love that stuff. So what I noticed in Jewish study Bibles, and there are two that I have referenced from two different publishing houses. And these two publishing houses would be like Deseret Book and Bookcraft for Jews, okay? The Jewish Theological Society, that's Jewish Theological Society, and the Jewish Publication Society. Those two are the really moderate center of the line on the wide spectrum of ways Jews interpret text. So when someone says, what do the Jews say about, I'm like, well, which Jews and when? Because how the text has been written has varied, as you might imagine, over the 2,000 years since the time of Christ. So almost both of these study Bibles have this idea in it. And so this is what we're going to do in class today. Turn your paper so that it is portrait orientation. Last week we did landscape, but today it's portrait. And I'd like you to draw this chart, and it will probably fill the entire page. So you'll have room maybe to write some notes adjacent to things, or another piece of paper to write notes. But we're going to be using this chart to look at the 6 days of creation. So we're going to number it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And hopefully, within the next 20 minutes, you'll start to see some very interesting patterns that you wouldn't recognize if you didn't have this formatting. Now, about 20 years ago, the Home Study Early Morning Seminary Manual had this chart. And I said, oh, the curriculum writers are using the same books I am, because that's where the chart came from. The more recent versions have put this chart instead. And those of you who've been here before can see why this chart is not going to work like this one does. So the chart itself and how you lay things out will help you to see things you may not have seen before. So we're going to go to Genesis chapter 1. It may be easier for you to have a hard copy for class rather than trying to jump back and forth on your phone. As the book begins, what is the name of God, from those of you who were here last week, that we find through all of chapter 1 of Genesis? What term is used for God? God, that's right. So when I said obvious answers, that's kind of one of them. Okay, so everywhere that it says God, the Hebrew is Elohim. E-L-H-Y-M. And Hebrew reads from right to left. And this is how I'm going to be writing the Hebrew, is with the English equivalents under it, so that you can begin to learn the letters and maybe read and make the sounds of the Hebrew words. Okay, so the thing that's interesting about this to me is this is the masculine plural ending, im. You'll also hear that on cherubim, right? And cocoa beam that Joseph Smith refers to in talking about the stars. Kokob is the Hebrew word for star. So cocoa beam is a great Hebrew word for the stars. People think it's silly. Well, it's not. It's Hebrew. But how you want to read this depends on your theology. So LDS members have Joseph Smith to inform them that Elohim is how he is going to refer to Heavenly Father as a personal name. Nobody else does that. Okay? This is the generic term for God, and it's the term used for our God, the one God, even though it's a plural, or the entire council of the gods, or all of the Egyptian gods, or when you refer to Baal, the god of the Canaanites. God is this still Elohim. Is it singular or is it plural? That's a good question. It always goes with a singular verb, which means that the translators have to choose, are they going to change the number in the subject or the number in the verb? Because in English, we can't say they was. It's just grading, right? But that's good Hebrew. They don't have to agree in Hebrew. So how you translate that will depend on your theology. So when you go to the book of Moses and are reading this, Joseph Smith will write, and they, the gods, created the heavens and the earth. And that is taken from exactly the same Hebrew. It just depends on how you choose to translate it. And that's part of why Joseph said it's correct as far as it's been translated correctly, right? And you don't have to change the words. You don't have to have messed up the text in order to change the translation. The translation may be dependent on the theology of the translator. Important to know. Okay, so it begins, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In Hebrew, that's 7 words. Bereshit bara Elohim et ha shemayim o et ha'eretz. 7 words. And 7 is a concept in Hebrew that means all, every one. That's why there's 7 days in a week. 7, it's complete. And so one of the rabbinic commentaries says, the first 7 words tell you all you need to know. God created the earth. The rest of the text is commentary. If he created it, he did it with a purpose. Find out what that is and follow him. Okay? First 7 words. Then in the second verse, and the earth was without form and void. The Hebrew there is tohu v'bohu. This is one of the very few places you find sound rhyme in Hebrew. And it means chaotic and empty. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. The deep is the word tihom, and it means an abyss or deep, chaotic water. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now, has God created anything yet? We usually think it begins with verse 3, and God said, let there be light. That's his first command of creation. But we already have stuff. We already have the tihom, the deep. And we have the Spirit of God hovering over it. Let me get out my first board here. This is where the Hebrew will be written down for much of this. So this is the word rakaf, which means hovered, like a bird. So even though the King James says moved, realizing that this is movement a bird makes, lets you see that the imagery used for the Spirit of God is a bird. And that will continue to be a very common metaphor for the Spirit of God. Think about the baptism of Jesus, that the Spirit descended like a dove. Okay, you'll see that in all the stained glass windows that have John and Jesus, and the dove is above them, and then the Father is in heaven. I mean, it's just how it's depicted. Now, for us, that shows all three members of the Godhead right there, right? Is the Father's up there, the Spirit, and the Son down here. That's not how Catholics would have read that painting. So not only do we read words differently, we read art differently. And what may speak to us in art may be very different from what it meant to the artist or the people the artist created it for. So we've got that beautiful bird image there. So on day one, when we get there, there's a term I wanted you to know. And this is the Catholic view of creation, and probably evangelical creationists as well. And that is creatio. Now, I don't know if that's an I or an E. It's probably an I. It's Latin. Ex nihilo, which I may use duct tape to keep this up another week. Randy, remind me to bring duct tape to tape that up. Creatio ex nihilo means creation out of nothing. That nothing was there, and then God spoke and light came into existence. That is the common interpretation of Genesis 1. The problem is that is not what Genesis 1 says. You already have the deep that is chaotic, and it needs to be ordered. So that's a major theme of chapter 1, is moving from chaos to order. So, on day 1, yes, question?
Would that be matter unorganized?
Absolutely, you could use that term, yes. And Joseph Smith does a little commentary on that in his King Follett discourse, where he talks about the Hebrew word bara, which is the word translated as, let me see if I can find where it is. It means to create. Oh, it's in verse 1. God created, Elohim bara. Joseph's spelling is a bit odd, but that's okay. Bara is the masculine singular, to create. But it's a word, a verb, that is only used of God. So whatever he's doing requires divine power or something, knowledge, because it's a verb not used by people. They form, they make, they organize, but they do not create. Only God creates. We don't have verbs that are only used, that I can think of, that are only used for one person. But it's an interesting idea. So, what gets created on day 1? Another obvious question, okay? And that is, just say it. Light. Okay, thank you. This is not going to work. Is there tape anywhere that you know of? I don't know. Sorry, we're kind of trying new things here, seeing what we can arrange. Or Randy can bring a C-clamp next week. There. Randy will provide a C-clamp. So God says, let there be light. Now the word for light, you know, it's ur. The plural of that is urim. Now, Mormons pronounce that Urim, okay? Urim and Thummim, Urim, light. And light, you will also see in the word menorah. That's a candlestick. It's a thing that holds light. So God creates light, and then God saw the light and saw that it was good, and God divided the light and the darkness. Now, this line is going to represent the word divide, because that's how we use it in math. If I'm talking about 2 divided by 5, that's how we write it. Okay? And I mean that, the mathematical sense of division, because that's how it gets translated in the King James. The Hebrew is bedel, which is right here, bedel, and it means to divide or to distinguish between 2 things. Now, this is a word that is going to be used a lot in the book of Leviticus, where the priests, one of their major responsibilities is to distinguish between that which is clean and holy and that which is not, that which can be used for sacrifice and that which cannot. That's their job. And that's the word that is used through the entire creation story. So it's actually a priesthood word. And the priesthood in the Old Testament are called to make that decision. Is it acceptable or not? Now, in order to help them make that decision, priests are not allowed to drink anything alcoholic for the whole week or 2 that they are on duty. Now, you might think, well, that's not so hard. Well, it is if the water will kill you. What are you drinking if you're not allowed to drink wine while you're on duty? And I like to suggest that that's part of our today, that while you are on duty as a priesthood-holding member of the church and are to be making decisions distinguishing between what's acceptable and what is not, you can't be drinking because you don't have a clear enough mind to make those decisions. So when are you not on duty? Never. Exactly. And so when can you drink? Never. And thinking about how the law of Moses, which is kind of applied back here, is used in our day, how the same principles guide the commandments, is something I really enjoy kind of teasing out of the text, and maybe you would enjoy that too. So God is going to divide the light from the darkness, and he calls the light day and the darkness night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Now, he just did something in that text that is going to be done through the whole of Scripture, and that is saying something once and then reversing it and saying it backwards. So it went day, night, light, dark, evening, morning. So the first sometimes becomes last, and the last becomes first. And that's how early we see that. First and last, reversing. That also is essentially chiastic in form. Someone who had keys.
Well,
or
a worker.
Oh, excellent. We went to one of the workmen. Thank you. By the way, the word work, we actually talked about it last week when we talked about the word Melchizedek. Melech, king, can also be translated as worker. So Melchizedek, king of righteousness, is also a worker of righteousness. It's the same word. So we might think about that in this chapter. So that's day 1. And then we see a paragraph mark in front of verse 6. That will be the only break in the text from the beginning, from in the beginning, Bereshit, down to this point. It's a continual string, as we talked about last week, of Hebrew consonants. No divisions between words, no divisions between sentences, no punctuation, no vowels. Knowing how to translate that becomes an art. And that's what scholars do. So at the paragraph mark, and those paragraph marks are the King James translators indicating this is a break in the text, in the original Hebrew text. Many modern Bibles don't include them. I find them interesting, so they're helpful. But there we begin with day 2, where you see, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Now, did he say, let there be water? No, because we already know it's already there. So we're going to put a firmament in the midst of the waters. And by the way, this is what your paper is for, that you draw this yourself so that any insights you have, you can write them down. Because if you're like me, they come and then they're gone and you don't remember what it was. So write them down. So we're going to put a firmament, and this is the Hebrew word for firmament, rakia. And I like that translation, because rakia means something metal hammered out extremely finely, like gold leaf. Or, as they'll use the terminology later, the heavens are as brass. So, okay. So this is the firmament between the waters and the waters above and the waters below. Now, I like to use pictures to kind of visualize things, and so I'm going to draw some clouds to represent water above, and then the rain falls from them. Water above, there's a lot of water up there. I don't know how many billions of gallons of it are up there. And then the waters below are some nice waves. So we have the waters above and the waters below. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning are the second day. Now, that's not the order we think of a day. For me, daytime starts at about 5 or 6 in the morning, and as the sun is coming up. But for a Jew, this text will determine how they define a day. It starts at sunset. So the instant the sun drops below the horizon is the morning of the next day, because it begins with evening, right? We start here, they're starting here. Now, that can get confusing if you're talking about the days of a week. First day, second day, third day. When does the first day of the week begin? Saturday evening at sunset. That's not how we think of Sabbath, unless maybe it's Fast Sunday and you've started your fast. But what that means is that when you get to the gospel writers, some of them place the same event on different days. And part of that confusion is because they might be writing from a Jewish perspective or from a Greek perspective, where a day begins in the dark of morning. Okay? We have different time, even, than other people. Okay. Day 3. Let the waters under heaven be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. Now, did he just create the dry land? No, it's already there. What he's doing is drawing the water off of the land and gathering it into one place to let the dry land appear that was under that chaotic water. I like to think of the story of Maui's hook. You've all seen Moana. And Maui's hook is that constellation you see in the southern hemisphere, in Polynesian mythology. His hook went down and caught the ground and pulled New Zealand, both islands, up out of the sea. So that's kind of the image here. And in order to show dry land, I just draw some mountains, because I'm from Utah. And down here we have the water gathered together. And this is the land and the sea. And the gathering, God called the dry land earth. Now, that's not the planet Earth. Okay? During biblical times, they didn't have that word. Earth becomes a term used for the planet once you get into the Enlightenment and a more scientific age. It's called the world, but not Earth. Earth, in the biblical sense, is the dirt, the ground. And that's going to become an important element in the creation story number 2 that we'll look at next week. Adam is made out of Adamah. The ground, the earth, is what man is made out of. So God gathers the waters together and he calls those seas. Now, from a Jewish perspective, this is a really important word. From a Mormon perspective, this is an important word. The gathering, right? To gather. Kava is to gather, and the waters have been gathered together. Now think about how President Nelson used that term. It's one of our phrases, the gathering of Israel. We're all involved in the gathering of Israel. This is the first place this word gets used in the text. And I like to stop and think about, this is the first time this word is used. I use a concordance to tell where the words are used. If you get a good concordance, like Blue Letter Bible online, it will give you every single time a word is used in the Old and New Testament. And sometimes I go and read every single time that a word gets used to get a better sense of what that word means. So this is the first time the word is used, and you gather the waters together. And this becomes a really important Jewish idea. The gathering together of water, that's kava, and then which is this word, and then you put an M in front of it to make it into a noun. So this is to gather, this is a gathering, and that a mikvah is a ritual bath used within Judaism. A lot of reasons that people would go to a mikvah. But it is living water, meaning moving water, coming in one part of the bath, going out of a drain, and flowing through. So to have a mikvah, you can't use dead water. We don't speak of water as dead, but we've got a big lake up there that is dead. And it's dying more every day because we overuse the water. And the Dead Sea and the Great Salt Lake are dead waters. That means that water flows in, but it doesn't flow out. And as a result, nothing can live in it except maybe brine shrimp, right? The salinity of it makes it so that it is deadly. And we know, they've told us, that as that Dead Sea here in Utah begins to even die more, it's going to cause us to die. So good luck with that, those of you who are young enough to be around when that happens. The gathering together of waters is then a ritual bath. And that is used for monthly cleansing by women. Men would go to the mikveh on a Friday in order to bathe and be completely clean before the Sabbath begins. And newborn babies who are not born to a Jewish woman, so a baby that you might adopt, my professor at College of Jewish Studies, he and his wife were unable to have kids, so they adopted a baby boy. And he was real excited. He said, "We know the parents are both over 6 feet tall. This is going to be an unusual Jew. People are going to want to marry him." And, you know, I didn't realize that was such an important thing. But his wife took their newborn child, that newborn baby, and went to the mikveh. And both of them naked, she takes the child into the water and immerses the child completely under the water and brings it out. And now that child has been born of the waters of Judah and is Jewish. If you convert to Judaism, as Sammy Davis Jr. did, you need to be immersed in the waters of Judah and brought out of the waters again. So if you're not reading the Hebrew, you're missing that this ritual bath has been a part of Judaism since day 3. And in Jesus' day, you get a guy called John the Baptist, or if you're using a different translation, he might be called John the Immerser. And he's calling Jews to come and be immersed in the water and brought back out of the water. Now, you'll notice the Jews don't say, "What are you doing?" because he's doing a very Jewish ritual. What they say is, "Why are you immersing Jews? We're descendants of Abraham. We have Jewish mothers. We were born of the waters of Judah. Why are you doing this to Jews?" And we miss that. But that tells you that there is more to that covenant made when you're immersed in the water than just being born in it. Remember on our family group sheets we used to write BIC, born in the covenant. And so that child had special rights and privileges within the church. They were kept on the records of the church. Primary follows up on them. But if someone has not been baptized, they're not on the records. So how does this child get on the records? Well, it was born in the covenant. And that's essentially the same idea. And so to enter the covenant then, you would need to be immersed in water. And we still use that ritual as we add on covenant responsibilities. Okay, so that's day 3, but it does not say and the evening and the morning. Do you notice that? He saw that it was good, and then verse 11, God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass." So there's a second half to day 3. And we're going to see that plants are created, and there's plants of 2 different kinds. You have grass and herbs which have seeds. And this I can draw more easily. Trees which bear fruit. Now the evening and the morning are the third day. That takes us to day number 4, which is verse 14. And God said, let the lights in the firmament of the heavens, let there be lights, to divide the day from the night. And we know he's going to talk about the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars also. But the reason for them, we usually just read right past and don't stop. We're going to stop today. It says, let's see, in verse 14, let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. So I looked up those words, and now we get a different board. And some of these words you will see used repeatedly, and so it's good to know what they are. This is the first time. We're going to pay attention to this. This is sign. It's the word oat. And it's spelled with an aleph, and a vav, and a taf. Now, this is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. This is the last. And this letter is the letter used to say and. So if you are reading the letters, as you read the sign, it is the first and the last, which is a name for Jehovah that Isaiah uses. He is the first and the last. He is the sign. Now, sign becomes a temple word. So knowing what it is in Hebrew gives you a little bit more insight into what signs are. And then it talks about seasons. This is not spring, summer, fall, and winter. That's not the word. It's a bad translation. It's not seasons. It's holy days. That is not dark enough, is it? Moed means the holy days of the Jewish calendar. Can you name any of the holy days? Passover. Purim is a nice festival, but it's not one of the holy days. The holy days are the 3 times that all Jewish men are commanded to go to the temple. So if you think about when did Jesus go to the temple, one is Passover. And in the fall, he's there again for the fall high holy days, which includes Rosh Hashanah, which is New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Well, what does it mean that the sun and the moon are for the holy days? Have you ever noticed that you don't know when Easter is going to be until you look on the next year's calendar? That's because Easter follows a similar pattern of being determined not by the date in a month, but instead by the position of the sun and the moon. So for Jews, Passover occurs, first, you're using the sun. You need to know when the vernal equinox is. Now, you know what an equinox is? Yes? It's when the day is the same length as the night, equal length. And that happens twice a year, about March 22nd and September 22nd is about when you get the vernal and autumnal equinoxes. Now, 90 degrees off from those, you have the solstices, which is the longest days of the year or longest night of the year. So in June, about the 21st, 22nd is the summer solstice, and 20th of December is the winter solstice. And you measure those by plotting where the sun is and how long it's up. And in Utah, you can watch the sunrise move northward this time of year along the ridge of mountains, and then it stops and starts moving southward past where it was in the spring till it gets to where it's the farthest south, and then it turns around and starts moving northward again. And you can watch that on the ridge of the mountains if you're up at sunrise. When the day is the same length as the night is the equinox, and that has been measured in temples throughout the whole world. Here in the state of Utah, there are solar temples built by the native peoples to mark the equinox. Stonehenge marks equinox. The temple in Tulum, when you go down to Cozumel and etc. When you're on the mainland at Tulum, there's a particular window that the sun shines through on the solstice, summer solstice, and the one it shines through at the equinox. So temples keep track of where the sun is, because where the sun is determines which day in their holy calendar you're dealing with. And the moon also contributes. The moon is, when it defines when you're going to have Passover, it will be 15 days after the first new moon, after the vernal equinox. So you have days and months, because that's a moon, and years, because that's solar, right? A solar year is from one equinox to the next. The sun measures a year. What measures a month? From one new moon to the next is a lunar month or month. And that idea is used in ritual months in a Jewish calendar and in every Islamic calendar. They have a calendar that has 28 days from one new moon to the next. And that 12 of those does not equal 365. Lunar months don't work with solar years. And that caused a problem when you use the months to tell you when to plant. Because sometimes the first month of the year is in March, but it will process backwards because the months are shorter. For you, I guess I should move this way. It goes backwards, and so in an Islamic calendar, Ramadan moves. Some years it's in the spring, some in the middle of the summer, sometimes at the same time as Christmas. And it just depends on that lunar calendar. In order to correlate the lunar calendar and the solar calendar, the Jews throw in an extra month every 4 or 5 years. And you have first Adar and second Adar. You need to know what calendar you're using because you might have an extra month this year. We have leap years, but that's a whole new month. It's quite a mathematical study to correlate solar and lunar. So the Passover is determined by 15 days after the first new moon, after the spring equinox. What is the moon doing 15 days after the new moon? It's a full moon. When there is the most light in the darkness is when the holy days occur. Now, that's not only a beautiful metaphor, bringing light into the world, but it also makes it safer to travel to the temple in a time and place where there are no street lights, right? So having the moon out will help at the festivals when you have to slaughter a newborn lamb for every family in Israel. They call in the whole priesthood from all over the country to come and be busy for that 24 hours, because you have to do it in one day, slaughtering all of those Passover lambs, and it's helpful that the moon is out. So it's at the new moon. The same thing occurs with the high holy days in the fall. Now, I don't know if you've noticed that that's kind of when our holy days are, if you want to think of them in terms of general conference. When do we go up to the temple? If you live in Africa and you are invited to come for conference, you probably will go to a temple while you're here. That used to be so much more common before we had temples built all over the world. You know, when we were kids, people would come to Utah for conference and go and be sealed at the temple. It's the one time they're going to get there. So those things would, when are our conferences? They're near the spring and fall equinox. Joseph Smith, when did Moroni come? When is Moroni Day? Does anybody know the date of Moroni Day? September 22nd, which is Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and all of the fall holy days are when Moroni came and Joseph Smith got the gold plates. That's true. They blow the shofar, which is an animal horn. And so you see another angel fly in the midst of heaven having the trumpet, right? He's on top of the temple. There's a lot of the Old Testament in our church and how we do things. And this is one of the reasons I'm delighted that we're reading the Old Testament this year, because we get to see what the antecedents are, what the laws used to be, and why we're doing what we're doing. And the symbolism of those holy days, as you might guess, the signs and ideas might also correlate with how we use those days. Okay, so signs and seasons and days and years. And then verse 20, let the waters bring forth abundantly moving creatures that have life, and fowls that may fly above the earth. So we're going to have two different kinds of animals. We have birds flying in the waters above, and fishes swimming in the waters below. And God saw that they were good, and God blessed them. This is when the blessings begin, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters. And the evening and the morning are the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after his kind, and creeping things. So we have land animals and creepy things. I write it that way because that helps me see insects, spiders, snakes, salamanders, lizards, all the reptiles. All of that would be defined by the rabbis as the creeping things. And both of those are commanded to multiply and replenish. And lobsters, which are creeping on the ground under the water. And I don't know if you know this, Jews can't eat them. No lobster, no crab, no shrimp, because all of those are scavengers and they eat garbage as they wander along. So that's not kosher. Then we get to the second half. God sees that that's all good, the animals. And then verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image. Who's us? Yeah, you need to stop there and say, oh, maybe radical monotheism is not what the text is describing. Maybe there is someone there helping God. And as you read in Proverbs, and as you read in Job, and other creation stories throughout the Old Testament text, you hear about who is helping God to create the world. One of the beautiful ones is in chapter 8 of Proverbs, where wisdom is at his side. Let me just read you a few words from Proverbs, chapter 8. Chapter 7, 8, and 9 are describing the wise and foolish women who build houses. And in the New Testament, it turns into a wise and foolish man. But the original version of the story is a wise and foolish woman who are building their houses. And in chapter 8, we get the wise woman. Her name is Wisdom, or in Greek, Sophia. And when you get over to verse 22, the Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before the works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth. While he had not yet made the earth, nor the fields, nor the highest part of the dust of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the deep. When he established the clouds above and strengthened the fountains of the deep. Can you see the references back to these days of creation? And through it all, wisdom is there. This is the wise woman. Okay, then we need to keep going. God created man, the word there is Adam, in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Now, to me, and this will be important, the Hebrew does not say man and woman. It does not say husband and wife. It says male and female. And those words are here on the board. Zachar is the Hebrew word for male. It's the beginning of the name Zechariah, or Zacharias in the New Testament, same name. And that always gets translated as God remembers, or Jehovah, to be more correct. Yah is Jehovah. El is God. So Zachariah is God remembers. But that's a secondary meaning of the word. The initial meaning of Zachar is male. So Zechariah's name is actually Jehovah is male. You can see why monotheists who believe God has no body parts or passions, parts means the sexual parts, by the way, if you didn't know that God is separate from us, not like us, even though it just said God is going to make us in his image. Zachariah, Jehovah is male. And so gender is the very first description of people. Male, and that becomes the word remember. And so if you've ever wondered why only the men's names are in the book, it's because those are the ones you have to remember. Sorry, you don't need to remember the women until about the end of the 1960s. Right? For those of us who lived through that, we remember. No sports teams, no credit cards, you couldn't rent your own apartment. I mean, right? Who remembers the women? Even though, I think that's exactly what Abigail Adams said to her husband, remember the ladies. Okay, so that's male. Female is the word nekeba. This is a very interesting word. It means having a hollow place. Good description of female. And so the very first terms used for human beings is male and female. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And I've given you all the seeds and the beasts and the animals and all of that, but the green herbs and fruit are for food. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Tov ma'od, very good, after he creates the people. So, at this point, you should start seeing some patterns. Somebody tell me a pattern you see in this chart. Okay, each day, it's divide, 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 divide. And I think of Lehi saying there must needs be opposition in all things. How old is that idea? In the creation, you have opposites. And if you're married, you recognize male and female are opposites, right? You got that. That's a good one. What are some of the other patterns? So let me just emphasize that division and comparing this and this. What's another pattern that you see? Okay, so 3 and 6 are similar in that they have 2 halves of the day. Yes? Like it gets repeated. That the pattern, and that works for the light and dark. Here, does it work for the waters? Animals. And I see the creepy things creeping out of the water in your wet basement. What about on the second half of the third day? Okay, so males bear seed and females bear fruit. When you read, no, this setting of ideas side by side and seeing similarities is the Greek word parabole. That comes from a parabola, that the two sides, well, that's a terrible, the math teacher in me doesn't like that. Let's do it better. That's a little better. Anyway, they're the same on either side of the zero line, right? It reflects on the, not necessarily the zero line, but the center of the parabola. And it means to set things next to each other. Can you see how that's the word parable? Where Jesus teaches a story with elements in it, and then occasionally he interprets what those are. And like in the parable of the seeds and the ground and the sower, he will interpret to the 12 what that means. And he'll say, he that has eyes to see, let him see. Well, this begins in Genesis chapter 1. And why it's important to slow down and look for patterns, look for repetition of words, look for when something that's happened before is happening again. Because this is how God teaches, is using parables. And Jesus taught that it was meant so that those who are ready to be taught can be taught. And those who are not ready to be taught, it's hidden from them and they are not responsible for that teaching. This is one of the tough things to teach missionaries, is stick with the basics to begin with, because you don't want to be handing temple ideas to people who haven't quit smoking and drinking and are living with someone. That puts them under an obligation they are nowhere near ready to live. So start with what they might be ready for, like that there's a Savior who has atoned for their sins. Now, speaking of the Savior, we're told that by Jesus, in fact, that, and we should go there. I think we quoted this last week. It's Mark? Let me look and see. Mark? No, Luke. Luke 44, verse 24. Reverse those. Luke 24, that's the last chapter, so it obviously can't be 44. Luke 24, verse 44 is where Jesus used the phrase that described the scriptures, right? These are the words I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled, which were written in the law of Moses and in the prophets and in the Psalms concerning me. He will say in other places, all things testify of me. The Book of Mormon emphasizes that over and over. The Doctrine and Covenants, all things in the earth, on the earth, above the earth, under the earth, all things testify of me. So, I looked at this chart and said, what in this chart is used to testify of Christ somewhere else in the scriptures? So, does anyone see something in this chart that Jesus or one of his apostles may use to describe him? He is the light of the world. And here we're quoting John, by the way. What's another one that John will offer us? He is the living water. He is the rock. That's Moses, by the way. Moses has written some great poetry about God as our rock. The water comes out of it. Yeah. Okay, so how does let's turn this into a whale here. A little more like a whale. How would a whale represent Christ? The story of Jonah, and he talks about there is no sign given you to the Pharisees, right? There will be no sign given to you but the sign of Jonah. Okay, you can actually read that two ways, by the way. Jonah, or Yonah in Hebrew. Sorry, that's the ending form, that's the middle form. Yonah, the name Jonah, is the Hebrew word for dove. What sign was given at his baptism? The sign of the dove. But there's another way we use that story of Jonah. 3 days in the belly of the whale, presumed dead, right? But then alive again. 3 days in the tomb, and then alive again. Good. What's another one? Good. Various land animals, including the lamb. Any others? Okay. Aleph. The Hebrew letter Aleph once looked like this. And you turn it over and it becomes R-A. That is the head of the bull, and these are his horns. And Aleph means bull. So what's an animal that represented Jesus? In Leviticus, it's translated as bullock, but it's the son of the bull, or a calf. Or a scapegoat. Or a red heifer. Or the lion. Do you see how multivalent Jesus is? I mean, there's so many symbols that speak of him. What about the sun? Malachi chapter 4. When the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. One of the symbols in antiquity for the Most High God was a sun with wings. What about birds? There's sometime Jesus compares himself to a bird. Good. That's one of the sacrifices at the temple. Very good. How oft would I have gathered you? There's gathering together of the waters. How oft would I have gathered you as a hen gathers her chicks, and you would not come? Now, I personally think it's a mistranslation. I think it's not a chicken. I think it's an eagle. And the reason I do is because one of the words for eagle in Hebrew is rachemah. This, by the way, is a feminine ending. And rechem is one of the Hebrew words for mercy. In Arabic, al-Rahman, they're the same language, Arabic and Hebrew. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Al-Rahman is the merciful one. So how did God bring us out of Egypt? on the wings of eagles. You see the Lord of the Rings connections here, I hope. He was a good Catholic. Yeah, did a good job. So a lot of birds. Anything else?
The fruit and the tree could be related to the type of dream where they ate the fruit and it was the love of God. That's
Okay, so we've got this tree that shows up in Lehi's and Nephi's dream, right? So when Nephi asks for an interpretation, I want to know the things my father saw. What does the angel show him? Believest thou in the tree? He doesn't say, do you believe in the path, the rod, the building, the water, the fountain of living waters? He says, do you believe in the tree? And so when Nephi says, yeah, I believe everything my father said, then the angel says, look, and what does he see when he sees the tree? He sees a woman, right? Beautiful and fair. And then they look away. And when they come back, the woman is bearing a child, which is her fruit. And what we eat is not the tree, it's the fruit of the tree. Can you see how scholars have associated the woman and the tree and the child that we partake of? Mike's quick. I'll go back to this mic. Even with brand new batteries. Who knew? Okay. So the tree we can see is presented to us as representing female. What about herbs and seeds having to do with men? Do you know any parables about seeds or? Okay, so we have the seed that the sower is sowing, and it falls on 4 different kinds of ground, right? It falls on the way path, which is hard as it can be. The seed's not going to get to germinate there. The birds come and eat it. And some is off the path, at the side of the path. Now, when we were overlooking the Sea of Galilee up on Mount Arbel, which overlooks Magdala, which is the town down on the sea right there. As we're walking along the path, I looked down and I said, oh my gosh, this is the parable right here. There it is. Let me draw what we saw. When you look down, you would see, oh, I can't talk and do this both. Sorry. Off the side of the path were rocks, and growing out of it were the thorns and thistles. But over here was the good ground, which you could till and plant in. And they moved the rocks. How many of you have been to Israel? Okay, covered in rocks, right? The whole place. There's a funny story told by the Jews that when God was creating the world, he tripped over the Rift Valley, which is where the Jordan River runs, and dumped half of his bag of rocks on Israel. I would say a third, and another third are in Jordan on the other side of the river. But rocks are everywhere, and so you have to move them off the way. And so at the side of the paths are rocks, and you can't get your plow into that stuff, and so that's where the weeds and the thorns and the thistles grow, is among the rocks. But over to the side, where you've moved the rocks out of the way, and this also is a good description of New England, isn't it? That they had to move all the rocks out of those fields to build the wall, mending wall. Good fences make good neighbors. But you have to move the rocks off your land. There are places they don't have rocks. That astonished me. And one is at Hans Mill. And my brother has me bring him rocks from places I have visited. So he wanted a rock, because I took my dad and went to Hans Mill in Missouri. And I couldn't find any rocks. There's the river right here, and it's cut through the land, but there's no rocks. It is like 10 feet of good dirt, and you can plow all of it. You can see why people were fighting over that land as compared to Vermont, right? And he's talking about what in that parable? What are the four different, the seed is all the same. The sower is taking it out of the bag. The seed, the gospel, the word is the same. It's the receivers. It's the people. There's 4 different kinds of people you're going to meet on your mission, right? And some of it is going to be good ground. So keep sowing. He will also talk about you plant a seed and it brings forth different amounts. Some double and some 30-fold and some 100-fold, right? I think one of the most interesting stories he tells about seeds is the one that he tells to some visitors from Greece. And he says, is it not necessary that a seed be planted in the ground and die in order to grow and bring forth fruit? And that's the story of Persephone and Ceres and the fertility gods, they're all women, in the Greek myths of seeds falling into the ground and then coming alive again. He's that seed that falls into the ground and brings forth fruit. That's so. Both men who do missionary work, that's every member is a missionary, but men are particularly expected to spend time doing missionary work. Women are welcome to join that. Almost half of our missionary force now is women. But what is more important in the life of young women? That they bring forth fruit before they're too old. What are your childbearing years? About 20 to 40, right? And after that, it gets dicier, or you lose fertility, or the seed is not good anymore. And so things are to be done at a proper time. And so when I went on a mission, well, when I got married, I was 19. So I didn't get to serve a mission. It was 21 back in those days. I already had 2 kids by the time I was old enough to go with my friends who were off serving missions. But the mission I served with Randy, those 2 missions, wow. A phenomenal experience, and at the right time. So it isn't that women aren't good missionaries. In fact, my brother, who was a mission president, said, some of my best missionaries, the very best, are the sisters. But if you're able to marry and have children, don't put a mission in place of that, is the counsel to women, which many don't want to hear. What was it that President Oakes just said about lowering the missionary age? Why did he lower the missionary age? To encourage earlier marriage, so that the elders and sisters would meet someone besides the people in their own small branch. Oh, I can assure you, my kids would not have dated, let alone married, anyone in the ward we lived in Ohio. There's nobody interesting for them there. When you only have 3 your age, but send them into the mission field where you have hundreds and you can begin to look around and say, oh, this one looks really interesting. After my mission, I'm going to go look her up. Or I'm going to write him. So you can see that there are reasons behind what the prophets say, and reasons often taken from Scripture. And we don't always know what God's wisdom is, but it would be wise to trust it as we make decisions in our lives. So I hope now, as you watch this, and they've returned to this order. Did you notice that at the temple? They're back to the Genesis order of the days. That means President Nelson wanted us to know that pattern. And if you remember 4 words: light, water, land, and seed, you can remember this whole chart. And remember that the terms of the covenant, as we talk about Abraham, is about land and seed. So watch for these 4 words in the next 40 chapters of Genesis, because they're there. We're being given an intro here. Now take what's being introduced and apply it, watch for it, in the lives of the patriarchs and matriarchs. And I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ, who's everywhere in the story. Amen.